And we love this country like they love their countries. We have to protect our country. So, we're playing a tough game.
The days of local drug busts and random motels, they were fun, but that's Breaking Bad stuff. Trump wants to take the fight to El Chapo's front yard. El Presidente doesn't comprehende. This isn't a Mexican standoff, this is an order. The CIA is already flying surveillance drones over Mexican territory, gathering intel on the battle space.
The desert night stretched endlessly, the horizon glowing faintly with heat lightning. It was quiet, too quiet for a border where smugglers and traffickers usually moved like shadows. But that silence was by design. The Sinaloa Cartel believed they had chosen the perfect moment to strike. A convoy of trucks, armored and armed to the teeth, prepared to cross into U.S. territory under the cloak of darkness. They carried more than just drugs. They carried a message. This was to be an invasion, a demonstration that no line on a map could contain their empire. But what they didn't know was that the United States was waiting for them. For weeks, intelligence agencies had been intercepting encrypted communications. The chatter was different this time, more coordinated, more deliberate. The cartel wasn't just moving product, they were moving men, heavy weapons, and vehicles across the Sonoran desert toward the U.S. border. The target was a remote outpost used by American agents, a symbolic strike meant to prove that the cartel could walk into the United States whenever it chose. Washington couldn't allow that. The order was signed and the operation moved into motion. This wouldn't be a job for Border Patrol. It wouldn't even be a mission for the DEA. This was a military problem now, and the solution would be delivered with overwhelming force. Navy SEALs were dispatched, flown into staging areas in the Southwest. Air Force squadrons repositioned quietly, their flight logs sealed. Surveillance drones circled high above, invisible against the stars. Every movement of the cartel convoy was tracked, every route analyzed. All that remained was to wait. And wait they did.
We're talking about sending military forces to fight against the drug cartels in Latin America. Do you think it's worth sending our forces, our U.S. forces there to take this on?
Cartels where?
Central Latin America.
Well, Latin America's got a lot of cartels. They've got a lot of drugs flowing. So, we want to protect our country. We have to protect our country. We haven't been doing it for 4 years.
Cartels are now officially in the Pentagon's crosshairs. And it's not just the wall anymore. Trump ordered the kill shot.
Hidden in canyons and scrubland, SEAL teams dug into concealed positions. They wore desert camouflage, their rifles fitted with suppressors, their night vision goggles glowing with eerie green light. They knew the terrain better than the invaders. They had been rehearsing this kill box for days, waiting for the convoy to roll in. Above them at 20,000 feet, Air Force pilots sat in cockpits, hands hovering over switches, engines humming in controlled anticipation. The desert itself had become a trap, and the Sinaloa Cartel was driving straight into it. The convoy appeared just after midnight. A column of pickups and SUVs, headlights dimmed, crept toward the border. Each vehicle bristled with weapons, mounted 50 cals, grenade launchers, and crates of ammunition. Dozens of sicarios rode inside, dressed in tactical gear, masks pulled tight, adrenaline burning in their veins. They believed this was their moment of glory. But the desert belonged to someone else tonight. The SEALs watched through their optics as the convoy crossed the line. The first trucks rolled into the designated kill zone, a dry riverbed with high ridges on both sides. The Americans held their fire. Patience was their weapon. Let them come deeper. Let them feel safe. More trucks followed until the entire convoy was boxed in by terrain. That was the moment the signal was given. The night exploded. The first strike came from the sky. An F-15E Strike Eagle screamed overhead, releasing precision-guided munitions. The lead vehicle erupted in fire, a shockwave blasting through the convoy. Panic rippled instantly through the ranks of cartel fighters. Engines roared as drivers tried to reverse, but the SEALs opened fire from the ridges. Suppressed rifles snapped in unison, every shot deliberate, every target dropping where they stood. The cartel returned fire wildly, muzzle flashes cutting through the darkness, but they were shooting at ghosts. SEALs moved in disciplined teams, changing positions, flanking, never staying in one spot long enough to be targeted. Machine gun nests hidden in the sand ripped apart vehicles trying to turn around. Air Force gunships circled above, spitting streams of 30mm rounds into the desert floor. Trucks that moments ago had carried confidence now burned like funeral pyres. Cartel commanders shouted orders in Spanish, desperate to rally their men. Avancen, disparen. But their words were swallowed by chaos. One by one, their vehicles were neutralized. An SUV tried to break free down a side trail, only to be blown apart by a Hellfire missile fired from a drone that had been watching them the entire time. Another truck full of fighters dismounted, sprinting for cover in the brush, but they were cut down by a barrage of precise rifle fire from SEAL sharpshooters. The desert became a killing ground. Every move the cartel made had been anticipated. Every escape route was blocked. The Americans controlled the air, the ground, and even the night itself. SEAL teams pressed forward, closing the distance, their rifles barking in short, efficient bursts. Their comms crackled with updates. Target down. Vehicle destroyed. Convoy contained. It was not battle. It was dismantling. One cartel fighter tried to shoulder an RPG toward the ridgeline. Before he could fire, a sniper's bullet punched through his chest, dropping him instantly. Another attempted to throw a grenade, but it detonated in his own hand after a burst from a suppressed M4 clipped his arm mid-motion. Terror swept through the remaining fighters. Some dropped their weapons and tried to surrender, shouting into the darkness. Others ran, scrambling into the sand, only to be caught in the withering crossfire that followed them like a shadow. The Air Force's role was merciless. Gunships strafed the outer edges of the convoy, ensuring no vehicle escaped the perimeter. Drones hovered with unblinking eyes, marking targets and feeding coordinates to the SEALs. Precision-guided bombs cratered the desert floor, sealing off escape routes and boxing the cartel in tighter. The night sky itself seemed to rain fire. Minutes felt like hours, but in reality, the battle lasted less than 40 minutes. By the end, the convoy was nothing but wreckage, blackened vehicles, scattered weapons, and the bodies of men who thought they could challenge the United States military. The silence that returned to the desert was suffocating, broken only by the crackle of burning trucks and the distant thrum of aircraft. The SEALs moved in with clinical efficiency, sweeping through the wreckage, confirming kills, collecting intelligence. Laptops, radios, and documents were seized. High-value cartel lieutenants lay among the dead, their ambitions buried in the sand. The few survivors were zip-tied and blindfolded, hauled off to helicopters under armed guard. By dawn, the battlefield was gone. The wreckage was cleared, bodies removed, the sand smoothed over by the desert wind. To the casual eye, nothing had happened. But those who were there, the SEALs who pulled the triggers, the Air Force pilots who dropped the ordnance, the cartel fighters who fled into the night, knew better. Something had shifted forever. The Pentagon released no details, only a terse statement. An attempted armed incursion by hostile elements was intercepted and neutralized. But whispers spread quickly. Across Mexico, rumors flew of an entire convoy wiped off the map in a single night. In Sinaloa, cartel bosses pounded their fists in rage. Their most loyal fighters had been annihilated in enemy territory. The message was brutal and clear. If you cross the line, you will be crushed. Washington framed it as a defense of sovereignty. The president's address was measured but firm. The United States will not tolerate armed threats on its soil. We will defend our people with all means necessary. The clip played on every news network, sending a chill through anyone who doubted America's resolve. For the cartels, the operation was a humiliation unlike any other. They had always believed themselves untouchable, too deeply entrenched in corruption, too feared on both sides of the border. But the Desert Massacre showed them something different. Against local police, against rival cartels, they were predators. Against Navy SEALs and the U.S. Air Force, they were prey. Still, victory came with consequences. In Washington, debates erupted. Some argued that treating cartels like insurgent armies was a dangerous escalation. Others countered that the line had already been crossed the moment the convoy rolled toward the border with military hardware. Inside Pentagon war rooms, the conversation shifted from if to when the next breach would come. The SEALS and Air Force had won the night, but the war was far from over. In Mexico, whispers turned to fear. Families of cartel fighters wept as word of the massacre spread. Rivals in the Jalisco and Gulf cartels mocked Sinaloa, calling them reckless for thinking they could challenge the United States directly. Recruitment posters still went up in dusty towns, promising glory and riches, but the young men who saw them remembered the pictures of burned trucks and lifeless bodies in the desert. The desert itself remained indifferent. By day, the sun baked the sand until it shimmered like glass. By night, the wind erased footprints, carrying away the smoke of battle as if nothing had ever happened. But the men who fought there, both American and cartel, would never forget. For the SEALS, it was another mission completed, another line in their quiet ledger of victories the public would never know. For the cartel, it was a scar, a night when their arrogance was answered with overwhelming violence. What began as a convoy became a cautionary tale. The Sinaloa Cartel had tried to breach the border, to project power where it had no right to tread. Instead, it had been ambushed, dismantled, and obliterated by forces it could never match. The ending shocked even hardened observers, not because the Americans had won, but because of how completely the cartel had been crushed. In the end, the desert told the story best. Under the pale light of dawn, there was nothing left to show of the battle. But those who knew, knew. The Sinaloa Cartel had crossed the line, and U.S. Navy SEALs and the Air Force had erased them from the map.